Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining this week's panel conversation. My name is Matt Fulton. I'm the Vice President of National Engagement for a company called Polco. We work around with communities on helping to build engagement and assessing performance from a resident and stakeholders perspective. And we've been doing these sessions really for the purpose of gathering creative solutions and ways that communities are engaging with their residents in meaningful ways, just to help you get a perspective on things that are going on in communities and to maybe pick up a new idea, something that you can use in your own environments. I really like these sessions as well because people who are not in local government get the opportunity to listen in and hear from leaders that are leading communities around the country. And today is going to be a great day because I've got three super leaders, all leaders in local government from around the country, that are going to be sharing what they're doing in preparing for the American Rescue Plan, as well as how they are going about in engaging and connecting with their residents. Here is the agenda for today. I will do a quick introduction of the panelists, and then I'll queue up the topic and get into the questions. We're going to be asking 3 questions of each of the panelists. When the questions are all through, there'll be a little bit of an opportunity for the panelists to either offer up some additional insights on things they want to make sure is presented, or to ask each other questions. It's always interesting to get that kind of conversation going. And so it generally takes about an hour. I'm just really appreciative that you are taking some time to listen in on this session. So let me do this. Let's kick into the introductions. Let me start with introducing James Earp. James is Kyle's first assistant city manager, and he's been in that position since September 2006. Kyle has done just an enormous amount of growth over the course of his tenure. It's going from 70 employees to over 300. And James has been a really integral part of building many of the key departments that are in the community, essentially building them from the ground up. His role has evolved over time, from overseeing all city departments to now specializing in development services. The main challenge that the community is working on right now. I mean, it's a community that has grown from 4,500 people in 2000 to 60,000 people. So James has been part of that exciting part of local government, seeing your community grow and being part of that growth. James has done a lot of work educationally. He's got a master's in public administration and a graduate certificate in environmental management from Harvard University, with a specific focus on sustainability in communities. And I think that's really an important aspect. But he also has degrees in finance and economics. Hey, James, thanks for being part of this conversation. Would you mind just adding a little bit more background to yourself?
No, Matt, thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's always exciting to get together with folks from across the nation that are peers to talk about the projects that we're working on and how we're trying to be creative and the things that we have available to us whenever these opportunities arise. So just generally, I started out in banking and finance and decided that I wanted to transition over into city management, and made that transition back in 2006. Well, actually 2004. As whenever I first came to work in city government as an assistant to the city manager, and then became the assistant city manager in Kyle. And that's where I've been growing an organization effectively from the ground up, like you pointed out. So lots of challenges, lots of unique opportunities, lots of first things that have happened. And AJ may understand this, but I've done probably in 15 years what most people do in 30. And that's where all this gray hair comes from. So
there's nothing more exciting than being part of a rapidly growing environment, because you are busy doing all sorts of exciting stuff. Really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Let me introduce AJ Johnson. AJ and I have been friends for a long time. Our primary connection has been through ICMA. AJ is the city manager in Urbandale, Iowa, and he's been so since 2009. Although he's got 40 years of experience in local government, serving in Minnesota, Ohio, and another community in Iowa. He's been active in ICMA and in his state associations. He's a former president of the Iowa Association, City County Management Association. And he's got degrees in bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. And AJ, I'm just really happy that you're part of this conversation. I have followed your career for a long time, and and I'm glad to call you a friend and colleague. And so thanks for being part of this conversation. You wanna add a little bit more to your background?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I enjoy these opportunities. Yeah, my background is a little bit more traditional in the city management environment. As you mentioned, this will be my 40th year in city management, and even though it might not come over on the camera, my hair has gotten gray as well. And I think that's just a situational problem with being in this business for 40 years. I followed more of a traditional role. When I was an undergraduate, I had an opportunity to be an intern with the city manager's office in the community that I went to undergraduate. And then when I pursued my graduate degree at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, a lot of opportunities presented themselves, but I had an 8-month internship with the city manager's office in Des Moines, Iowa, a community of well over 200,000. So it was one of those, you keep your mouth shut and your ears open, and you learn so much, and just being that fly in the wall, and it was great. And then I had an opportunity to start my career in a community called Sidney, Ohio, just north of Dayton, about 19,000. I was the assistant to the city manager. And I was in that role for 4 years. And as Matt mentioned, I did move on to Minnesota, and I was my first city manager role in a community of about 6,000 people. And that was a real great learning experience, because as most people understand, when you're in that smaller community, even though you might have a title, it is literally that you open up City Hall in the morning. You put coffee on before a council meeting, you close up, and you check that there is enough hand towels in the restroom. I mean, it's just kind of, you're forced to do everything. But it's a great learning experience as well. And then I had the opportunity to move to Muscatine, Iowa, a community of about 23,000, right on the Mississippi River, south of the Quad Cities. And that was a great experience as well, because it was a highly manufacturing-based community. A lot of well-known manufacturing opportunities took there. Bandag Recycling Tire, Retread Tires was founded there. H&I Corporation, which makes a variety of office equipment, and they're one of the second largest manufacturer of office equipment in the United States. Monsanto, Musco Sports Lighting, a whole host of other things. Very manufacturing-based community, in a community that was founded in 1851. So a very old community with lots of history. And after a 20-year stint there, which I still kind of pinch myself, because I never planned to be in that location for 20 years. And then I had the opportunity to move into Urbandale, which is a suburban community of the Des Moines metropolitan area, about 45,000 based on our recent census. And I always joke that I went from smokestacks to no stacks. We're 70% residential, and we're a traditional suburban community where the homeowners and people who lived here commuted into the Des Moines metro, to Des Moines downtown to work. That has obviously changed, and that has evolved over time. And it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out after the second phase of pandemic has gone through. We'll probably be through another third phase, unfortunately, but it has really shifted things around. But it also has brought to, the environment of working within the metropolitan area and the partnerships that you have the advantage of being part of. We have a number of joint activities that we do: joint public safety communication, joint animal control, joint wastewater treatment, joint transit systems, everything that you become part of that whole. And it does create a different set of dynamics of dealing not only with your own staff and council, but with other communities that you want to partner with, or their expectations are that they need you to partner with them to make it better. So again, a different set of dynamics, but it's exciting. It always is. It's never non-challenging, and I still enjoy it very much. But I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. And you may have been in the business for 40 years. You don't look it. Your hair may be a little bit gray, but you do not look 40 years.
Well, I started when I was 12.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for that background. I would love to hear, as you start thinking about these questions, love to hear a little bit more about the collaboration that you think might come out of the American Rescue Plan in your environment. You're in such an exciting part of the Des Moines metro area. I'm really excited to kind of hear what you've got going on. So thanks. I really appreciate you being here, AJ. Let me introduce our third panelist. I have really enjoyed getting to know Steve Ruger a little bit, just kind of via LinkedIn. This is the first time we've actually met. He's the deputy city manager in the city of Rio Rancho, New Mexico. A diverse and growing community, about 104,000 residents. He oversees operations of fire rescue, libraries, utilities, IT, and the city clerk. He's got a career history of being a city clerk for both Rio Rancho and Aurora, Colorado, another huge and growing community. Steve is a champion for equitable service delivery and leads the city's cadre of equity champions. He's got an MBA and is an active member of ICMA, serving on various committees. He also likes spending time with his friends and families and playing the saxophone. I always appreciate a good musician, Steve. And exploring the vast open spaces of the Southwest. I got to tell you, I just mentioned it to you. I just was so impressed being in New Mexico when I was traveling a couple of years ago. Really glad that you're part of this conversation. Really nice to meet you, and would love it if you would just share a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. And anybody's welcome to come visit New Mexico. And I make a good tour guide, so happy to show you around. Unlike James and AJ, I don't have hair yet anymore, so I don't know what that means. So, notwithstanding the hair color, I'm jealous that you actually have hair. But no, I'm more on the AJ side of the coin, where my whole career has been focused on local government administration. That's all I've ever wanted to do. I have a bachelor's in sociology from Wichita State, and then an MPA from KU. And I started actually interning as well for Bill Buchanan in Sedgwick County, Kansas. So I worked with him for a year, and what a great way to be introduced to local government operations, large full service county. I wanted to get back to the West. I'm actually a native Coloradan, and really wanted to have the lifestyle that you get in the drier climates and the mountain plain states. But Rio Rancho is just a tremendous place to work. So I started working here in 2005, and they needed someone to come in and really help them with some major capital projects. We were building a new city hall, a new event center, 6,500 seat, $32 million event center, $80 million worth of utility infrastructure, a new library, a new aquatic center. And they really need someone to come do the contracts administration and really manage those high level projects. So I started in finance, worked there for years, got a lot of general experience just working through those processes and working with all the departments. Ended up having an opportunity to become city clerk for 7 years in Rio Rancho, and running elections is one of my passions, and bringing democracy to the people is something that's very important to me. And I miss being the chief election official, because it's just such a great way to be involved with the community. From there, I actually had an opportunity to be the city clerk of Aurora, Colorado for a couple of years. Amazing opportunity. I don't know if any of you know Jim Twombly there, but he's a great leader, great city manager of the community there. And I learned so much by working there. Rio Rancho called last year and said they needed a deputy city manager to come back and help. They were in an interim city manager status. With COVID going on, they really needed assistance. So it was really easy for me to make that decision to come back here. And I love being in city management. As Matt alluded to, equity is a big thing for me. I work very closely with ICMA. I'm on a panel with them right now through the Kettering Institute to explore race, equity, and inclusion, and how we're going to push some models out to local governments on how we can better serve our community equitably. Those things are very important to me. I'm also on the negotiation team for three labor boards here in the city. We have full-on AFSCME and then a police and fire union. And so the conversation today, I think, will tie in really well with some of the discussions we've had with our union members as well. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm very excited to be here with the other panelists, great people. And if any of you are going to ICMA this year, I look forward to meeting you in person.
Steve, I'll take you up on that. I'll look forward to meeting you there. You actually have worked with some very well-respected managers in our profession. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And really I appreciate all you guys being here. You got a lot of things on your plate. I just really appreciate you taking some time. So let's kick into the topic. The topic of the session is the value of community engagement under the American Rescue Plan Act. Every community, every organization, every resident has gone through such a disruptive time over the last 16 months or more now. And all of those disruptions have had a huge impact on just the connections that residents are able to have with their local governments and with their sense of community in any way that they define it. Engagement has never been easy. And so then you lay on top of that the pandemic, and you lay on top of that all of the civil disruptions that we've had and the political divisiveness that we've been running into. And it really all has a huge impact on communities' abilities to make those connections meaningful, and that you have this authentic engagement and connection with your residents. The pandemic, of course, made everything a little bit more challenging. And so the question today really surrounds the notion of, how do you go about making sure that people feel part of your community? What have you found successful, particularly with those hard to reach populations, for making those connections and helping them feel like their voices are being heard, that the way that they are contributing to decisions are meaningful, and just advancing your communities through the pandemic and through this recovery period. Now we have this opportunity to use American Rescue funds. And so we're wanting to explore a little bit more about how you're gearing up for the use of those funds, so that you can bring your communities forward in a way that is going to bring your community together and help you recover economically and in every other way that that you need to in your own respective environments. So there's 3 questions that I want to pose to each of you today. The first one is, how are you going about identifying your community needs and priorities that you're going to be considering when you start using your ARPA plans or start planning for the use of those funds? What are the approaches? What are the current plans? What are your engagement strategies? All of those kinds of things. And then, what role do residents play in your community? What impact does their input have on the decision-making process that you have in place with your community? And then finally, love to learn a little bit more about the tools and strategies that you're finding successful for engaging with your residents. We're also interested in understanding, how do you go about tracking your performance, which is going to be so critically important as you come out of the pandemic, being able to document and track whether or not you're meeting your strategic initiatives and goals, or need to do some tweaking to make sure that you're accomplishing what you want to have accomplished. So with that, let's go ahead and kick in onto the questions. James, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind. Can you talk about how you are going about in identifying the community needs and priorities that you're going to be considering when you start using the ARPA funds in Kyle?
Yeah, Matt. So I guess I should start by setting the stage. And I know that we're trying to keep our answers brief to roughly 3 minutes. And it's very difficult to talk about all this stuff in such short clips. But generally speaking, Kyle, the city of Kyle, south of Austin, and we were ideally situated for the challenges that COVID brought to us, in the sense that here's a book right here. It's called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock. Talks a lot about the Google culture. And we had already started really embracing the virtual work environment, the remote work, flexible working space, shared workspace environment. We had already put into place a lot of technological upgrades, if you will. We don't have phone systems. We have everything VoIP. So right now I'm talking to you from my home, 7 miles from City Hall. But if someone called my desk at City Hall, it would ring here at my desk at my house, or on my cell phone, or on my laptop, or wherever else I might be. And nothing says I have to be at my house. I could just as easily be talking to you and dealing with all my work issues from an island somewhere in the Caribbean. So we really started to embrace that. And about 3 years ago, maybe 4 now, also how our citizens engage with us, because one of the biggest things about City Hall is that citizens are used to going to City Hall to conduct business. So how do we then make the business available for folks if we're going to be working in a remote environment? So we went with completely online systems. Permitting is a big one. Municipal court's a big one. Utility billing is a big one. So we put in a lot of infrastructure way ahead of time, well before anybody even knew what COVID was going to be or what it was. Now, that said, getting us to the ARPA question, we've done a lot of innovation as far as reach out to our citizens and engaging our citizens, even through COVID. Like for an example, during the worst of the COVID time, when everything was completely shut down and nobody was working in person, we still had the library open. We still had internet available. We bought laptops and made them available for citizens to check out so they could be engaged if they didn't have those resources at home. So those are the kind of the communities that are a little bit more challenged in trying to engage with technology. We did curbside book checkout to where you could just get books checked out and we would leave them at the curbside and you'd come pick them up. So there was a lot of innovation that went on in that regard. As far as the ARPA specifically, one of the challenges I think that AJ already alluded to is the shovel ready part of ARPA. So in any of the big federal projects, and ultimately that severely limits what you can be looking at because you don't have a very big window of time, and it needs to be something that was already kind of on your radar. So one of the things that our citizens have been giving us a lot of feedback on was our utility billing, and not just specifically the billing, but the metering itself. So for the folks that don't know that might be listening or paying attention, there are very specific guidelines that ARPA can be used for. One of the easiest ones to fall underneath is utility improvements. There's also some broadband improvement things that you could do. So we're looking at trying to address some of the biggest concerns that our citizens have had by moving from AMR to AMI. And what that means to those who don't know the lingo is your water meters now very seldomly are read by a person walking around reading your meter manually. They're usually either radio reads where a car drives by your block every so often to pick up the readings from your meters that's being broadcast by radio signal, or that's the AMR, or they're the AMI, which is effectively like they're smart meters and they're tied into your data infrastructure, and you're able to take real-time data from the meter rather than having to wait for the person to drive around and collect the information and bring it back to City Hall. So we're looking at putting in place the broadband infrastructure that would be needed. Right now, we're not talking about making broadband available to the citizens as a whole as a part of this project, but that's obviously something that we could branch out to in the future to do some sort of broadband Wi-Fi coverage for the city where citizens could connect to the broadband that way. But we're starting with building the infrastructure and the backbone and replacing the meters so we can go to live meter reads. And what that will mean for people is if you have a water leak, you would be able to identify it right away. You can do remote turn on and turn offs of some of the valves if we install those processes. So we're looking at the first step to a smart city type endorsement. And then from there, now we have engaged Honeywell, who is looking at expanding that to include streetlights, smart streetlights, and various other smart city initiatives. So that's where we're looking at our ARPA right now. Some of that is because we can quickly respond to the demands of ARPA and the requirements. And some of it is directly related to the feedback that we've been receiving from our citizens. No one's more upset than any of us, I guess, would be, but no one's more upset than getting a water bill that's $5,000 because you had a leak that you didn't know for a month. And it's actually going to be 2 months because by the time you realize you had the leak, the bill's already a month behind. And those types of scenarios. So even from a sustainability standpoint of being able to better control our potable water supply, that's all the aspects of the smart metering. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's impressive. I appreciate how you have kind of proactively oriented the community towards becoming more of a smart city, and sounds like the ARPA funds is going to be allowing you just to kind of continue in on that road for continuing to implement and install some of these smart city technologies. And I totally understand the metering aspect of the benefits that can bring to the community. So thanks very much. That's very impressive. AJ, can you talk about how you are going about, or how your community is going about identifying community needs in the context of how you're going to be using the American Rescue Fund funds?
Well, as you alluded to earlier on in some of your introductory material, that some cities are still at that beginning stage before they've jumped off to kind of assess where it is they want to go. And I think we're really at that point now as well. Just like everyone else, we waited for that number to come out. And for our community, because we're a non-entitlement city under 50,000, our dollar amount was $6.6 million. And as James alluded to, there are some, under the ARPA rules, there are some very easily obtainable or easily identifiable projects or types of projects that you could literally pull off the shelf and say, we need to do this. And they fall within the parameters of the guidelines. And we have those as well. So that's kind of a fallback for us, is to say that, we have a number of capital projects that are one-time expenses that we could use this for. But I also caution everyone that the conversation we've had internally and externally is that $6.6 million sounds like a lot, but in the world of construction, in the world of providing services, it really isn't all that much. And of course, you never want to get locked into something where it's a continual expense. It's, the one-time expense is mostly construction. So for us, we've been talking with the council internally with our staff, but also with the council, kind of laying that groundwork as to, here's your parameters. Here's the things you can't do. Here are the things that they want you to do or can do. And here's your dollar parameters. And again, we've identified a number of capital projects. We've also looked back at our strategic plan that the council established a year and a half ago, and our community survey that we do once every 2 years. And we look at those. We've looked at those to say, here's what the community is looking for. They're looking for, again, 70% residential. As you can imagine, it's services that they can enjoy as residents: recreation, trails, streets, sanitary and storm sewer improvements, those type of things that are more traditional, but at the same time, they are easily obtainable through either a capital improvements program or through something like ARPA to say we want to do this. As I also mentioned, as being part of the collective good, if you will, of the Des Moines metropolitan area, I've had conversations with my counterparts throughout the Des Moines metro, and a lot of questions. There's a lot of services that we all share, and a number of those that were based on funding from hotel motel tax. And through the coronavirus pandemic, those areas really took a hit. But they benefited the entire metro because they would collect resources, financial resources, and then they would make distribution based mostly on arts and entertainment type of projects. And so the conversation has been, do we want to use some of the ARPA money to support those activities to bring them back up to a level of making distribution to communities for public art, for public entertainment, for those types of projects and programs that really did get adversely affected by the pandemic. And so that conversation is ongoing. And again, as James mentioned, we were also not as well prepared as they were, but we pivoted very quickly, and we were able to, we had systems all ready to go for all of our permitting for our community development, building, construction, inspections, et cetera. We did the curbside pickup for libraries. We also did programming. We did reading programs, our children's programming that we did where we would do story time virtually. We have a senior recreation center, and we had instructors who did virtual programs for our senior population, which is extremely, they really valued that connectivity. And without that, they had the virtual programs. And so we had those limitations just like every other community. But back to the ARPA issue, we really haven't come up with the full-blown, this is what we're going to do and how we've engaged the citizenry. We will be doing that, and it kind of coincides with our update of our comprehensive plan. So as we seek out opinions and concerns from our residents, both residential, commercial, and industrial, about how our planning process goes, we also want to find out where is it that we can make a difference. And I believe that some transformational type of projects may be out there, but with that cautionary, we now can maybe get you going, but you'll have to sustain yourself. And that'll be part of the examination that the council will have to take into consideration, because as with any federal program, The money flows through us, can go out to the community, but then we're held accountable. And so that's one of the things that we want to make sure that everybody understands, because when the ARPA money and the programs came out, we had a number of community-based programs that do very good work for very small audiences. And boy, we'd like to get a hold of some of this money. And we have to be very cautionary about that, because there is that unfortunately, that connecting back to us and that accountability. So again, we haven't set anything up, but we also know in the next several months that the council will be engaged in those conversations.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. I appreciate you bringing up the accountability. I mean, the worst thing in the world that could happen is that we get through this ARPA program and where local governments nationally aren't able to really demonstrate the effectiveness of how those funds were being used to move communities forward in a meaningful, maybe not transformative way, but in certainly a meaningful way. I am really intrigued in it. We'll want to follow the collaboration. Do you think that the ARPA program itself will have impact on how much collaboration you do with your neighbors?
That's yet to be seen, but I think it will, because, our history in the Des Moines Metro is a lot of collaborative projects. And so politically, councils, representatives of each of the council get together once a month, and they have discussions at the council level about, projects that may cross boundaries. Similar types of ordinances in dealing with, things like wind energy, solar panels, things as mundane as urban livestock and those type of things, where they want continuity between the communities, because you literally cross the street and you're in another community. And the politics of the Des Moines Metro is there's a desire that you're not held up against another community to say, oh, they do it differently in community X. You're one of your neighbors. And so they play you off against that. And we want to eliminate that. We've done a really good job with that. But we also know that we all have a desire to have certain levels of services that are more easily obtained by a collective approach. I mentioned previously public safety dispatching. There's 5 communities that have our own dispatch center that we dispatch. Animal control, again, as somewhat mundane as that is, but we have 3 communities that have gone in on that project that we have a higher level of service than collectively than we could individually. So I think ARPA will play into that, especially things for projects that cross those boundaries. And I think that will be certainly something that at the council level that they're going to take into consideration, because the expectation has been built over the years that we will approach collaboration in a positive and an open manner. And everybody understands that at the end of the day, there's that parochial issue about, well, I still have to do what's best for my community. But that collaborative notion has really been ingrained in the communities. And it really is that first thing that you check off the box, is there something I can do with another of my neighbors to make this more cost effective or to give me a higher level of service?
That sounds great. Yeah. Best of luck with that, AJ. Really appreciate that response.
Hey, Matt, I've got just a quick comment on that for AJ. At the very least, because there's an expense to administering these, you all ought to partner up to try to minimize your administrative expenses.
Good point.
Thanks, James. Steve, can you talk about what you're doing for identifying community needs and priorities that you're going to be considering when you start to allocate the American Rescue Funds?
Absolutely. And I really have enjoyed listening to AJ and James, and just the similarities that we're looking at between what both of you all have mentioned already. I have the unique benefit of having worked in 2 communities during COVID, and I got to see the initial response and planning in Aurora, and then also come in Rio Rancho right in the height of the pandemic and be involved in issues here. So there's a dichotomy in that Aurora really needed the CARES Act funding and some of the support to really keep their operations going, avoid more furloughs, that type of thing. Rio Rancho, on the other hand, oddly enough, we are actually the lowest collection of sales tax per capita in the state. So we've always struggled with less resources for a city of our size. Most of our tax dollars go to Albuquerque. We're a suburb adjacent to them. We share a border. And unfortunately, we just don't have a lot of retail here. So it really affects our coffers. However, with online gross receipts tax, we're actually gross receipts tax instead of sales tax. We actually saw a tremendous benefit from the pandemic here in Rio Rancho in terms of our budget. So a lot of the money we've gotten from CARES and now ARPA is really above and beyond our budget projections, even our original ones. So our tax revenue was coming in actually exceeding our original budget projections for the last fiscal year, notwithstanding the economic downturn because of COVID. So we were very fortunate. We slashed our budget. We've actually been able to accomplish a 63% fund balance. 63. It's 32% fund balance, but it's millions and millions of dollars that we have. One of our biggest problems with community engagement is residents like to look at a huge pot of money and say, oh, well, you can come pave my road, fix this right away. They don't understand the restrictions on the use, first of all. And secondly, the idea of one-time funding is a challenge, I think, for our elected officials and our community as well. Some of these things, as been alluded to by the two other panelists, have a recurring cost that you have to factor in. There's administrative costs, there's things that factor into that. So we've had to be very careful. One of the super creative things that we've done and involved our community in, just on the CARES Act side, is since we did use that to recoup salaries that we had already paid, we now have some excess revenue in our budget. We want to be very responsible with that. So we actually did the National Citizen Survey and completed it in August. So I'm so thrilled that we were able to do that right during the pandemic and really get the pulse of the community in these different times. But one of the side-alone questions we asked is if they would be willing to establish a $10 million permanent fund in our city charter. And so we'll have a question on our ballot in March. If the voters approve that, we'll take $10 million of CARES Act funding, put it aside in basically, an endowment type of fund that hopefully will grow and provide us some great revenue to do some creative things going forward. So we're really excited for that. And it's just, we're very blessed, to have some additional options with this money and be a little bit more creative. To the other two panelists' point, Rio Rancho and Aurora both were doing tremendous virtual services to begin with. And I think that's one of the benefits of the pandemic happening now. If this had happened 10, 15 years ago, I think we would have all been caught with our pants down, to be blunt. And we still were, but the good thing is I think there were a lot of creative solutions that were already there in service delivery remotely that we were able to capitalize on and expand. And so with ARPA funding specifically, though, we're already using it. And one of the best things we've done, and I'm so excited for this effort, is anybody in our staff that can prove that they've been vaccinated, bring their Vax card in, is eligible for a $250 stipend in their paycheck. And that's a way for us to use a carrot approach to encourage vaccinations and instead of doing a vaccine mandate, which we're not there yet. A lot of communities I know are struggling with that, and there's a lot of politics involved in that as well. But just having a little incentive to get vaccinated was a tremendous use, I think, of the ARPA funds. In fact, in the meeting I was at before this one, we have now decided to go ahead and extend that to all new employees as an incentive. I don't know what's going on in James or AJ, your communities, but in New Mexico, we're getting really hit hard by lack of applicants for our jobs. It's just very, very hard to find talent right now. And so to James's point on, being more flexible on work schedules, being creative about how people work, what's the private sector doing that we're not, that would encourage people to come into jobs? One of the things that we see is people aren't getting jobs because they are looking for a 30-year pension anymore. I think people are looking for the next highest dollar amount, and maybe they'll stay 2 years if you're lucky. So we want to look at some retention tools, and we're excited for the ARPA funding to really help us out with that. We have a lot of utility issues, and so we're really kind of at the planning phases right now, like the other two panelists, on how we can use that to beef up our water wastewater delivery. There are a couple of shovel-ready projects that we're hoping we can fund. We have actually the highest water rates in the state, so we're hoping we can get creative with this funding to offset some of the cost to our residents as well. That's one of the things we consistently hear from our residents, is that our utility rates are very high. And that's partly due because we're a community of 100,000, but we're 104 square miles only, which 20% is developed. And we've developed not inward out. So all of our utility infrastructure it has to go miles to get to where it needs to go. So it's a real challenge on the finance side. We also have a lot of issues with our groundwater source, not a lot, but arsenic levels are higher than most parts of the country. And we've had some federal mandates that have required us to put in some arsenic treatment facilities that have jacked up our rates as well. So we're excited. To James's point, we're looking at our meters as well. I remember when we put in our current meters 15 years ago, and it seems so soon, but that's a long time for a meter. So we've been replacing those over the years, and we're hoping that we can do some more of that with the funding. And then the last thing I'll say is one of our big focuses right now is cybersecurity. And so ARPA funds allow for a little bit of that. So we're hoping to engage a consultant to come do some penetration testing. We're finalizing our updated cybersecurity policies right now, and we're looking forward to using some of the fund for that effort as well. Similar to AJ, we also manage a dispatch center that's regional. And so we want to invest some money in there as well and make sure it's as secure as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. You got a lot of stuff going on, and you seem to orient yourself to communities that have got a lot of room for growth. Right?
Yes, it makes it fun.
I'm glad that
Come
you
on
had
down the call.
Yeah, right.
I'm glad you had the opportunity to have the NCS go on during this time to basically ask your residents about the potential opportunities and their interests. I just pulled up your results of your NCS, and congratulations on the endowment idea. I think that's a really creative approach towards sustainable kind of funding for things that are coming on down the road. Really appreciate that. Let's move on to the second question. And AJ, can you talk about how community input has an impact in Urbandale as it relates to making decisions that serve residents and businesses?
Certainly. As we mentioned, the community survey, once every 2 years, we do a fairly extensive community survey. And from that, we are able to gauge not only our current level of services that we're providing, but also what really are the motivating factors for our residents moving forward. Where is it that they want to see us make investments, provide that support? Strategic planning with the council every 2 years, as our cycle of elections are every 2 years, so that group of council members is subject to change every 2 years. So we go in and we update our strategic plan. We seek comments from that. Once the council establishes their parameters for the plan, then we push it out on social media and we ask for comments. We hold public hearings, and then we finalize it with a vote by council so that it is part of, for staff, our marching orders, so to speak. The community survey does well. We also, during the pandemic, we had an opportunity to really beef up our communication opportunities and outreach through social media, through all those types of platforms. And, whether people were stuck at working from home or whatever it was, we really saw an uptick of people who were engaging us through those social media platforms. And that's a door that we've gone through that we're never going back. It will look different in the future as technology presents different avenues to have more readily available, more engaging, more like this, versus just someone typing in something and coming through social media or a comment that you might see on Facebook or Twitter or one of our accounts. So we'll depend on that, because I think it's still hard, even though you have venues to engage the public, it's still hard to get them up and going. And there's that old saying that silence is affirmation, and you hate to, that's kind of, well, maybe you didn't try hard enough. But at the same time, we all know and we've all experienced, you could have a meeting in someone's backyard and they still wouldn't show up. And so there's still that getting them out, getting them engaged in an environment where people, again, during the pandemic, they had so much of their lives disrupted, either through work, through children, for their schooling, for their social, everything was just upended. And so to get them to say, oh, by the way, we'd like to hear from you how we can spend your tax dollars or how we can invest ARPA money, that's still a bit of a challenge. So again, we really, to get people out there is going to be very critical for us. And at some point, you do have to say, after 3 or 4 types of different attempts, the council still has a responsibility to make a decision and then move it forward.
Yep. AJ, just kind of given your tenure in Urbandale, can you talk about the impact of doing that every other year strategic planning process over time? What that means to a community?
Yeah, there's been a lot of stability with the council members, quite honestly. So there's been continuity in their strategic planning, and they kind of link it toward their capital improvements program, knowing that it's a 5-year, a 10-year type of view about how we're going to extend infrastructure, how we're going to look at park development, how we're going to address certain things. So there's been that continuity, which has been it's been easier to plan, and it's been easier to identify our financial resources that we're going to direct to that. And so now that we have an election this fall, Iowa does elections for councils on the odd years in the fall, and come November, my 2 senior council members out of 5 will only have 2 years experience, versus 2 years ago, I had 3 that had 12 years experience on council. So that really is going to shift the dynamics, and generationally it's shifting as well. The council members are more baby boomers, current, and then we're going to go into the next 2 generations past the boomers, and their outlook and their anticipation and their expectations of local government, there's a similarity, but there are still that notion of we can do more for more people. So that's going to be interesting how that drives that. But really, you use traditional means to reach out. And again, with technology being what it is and people's adaptation technology, especially during the pandemic, we're hoping that we get more engagement from people that if they can't be here in person, which is always great, that they at least connect through some social media.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's just such an important part of local government, that whole strategic planning aspect over time. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, can you talk about how community input influences how resident and business needs are met in Rio Rancho?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to some of the things AJ was mentioning, but so obviously we just completed the NCS, which is great. We're relying very heavily on our boards and commissions right now to kind of be the pulse of the community. I think as AJ was alluding to, one of the things that is really challenging for me is we've made local government more accessible than ever. You literally can sit in your living room now and engage in most public meetings. And yet we're not seeing a huge turnout to those meetings like we would hope. Making it more accessible doesn't necessarily drum up a lot of citizen engagement. One of the things that I think is going on is we have to be mindful that we're dealing with this from a local government perspective, but our residents are also dealing with this in their personal life, and they have a lot going on too. So we have to be mindful that as much as we want them to engage and be part of the process, some people just are tapped out and just don't have the time. So I think it's important for us to identify channels that may not be traditional to make sure we're getting that community feedback. Social media has been huge for us as well. And next complaint, as I call it, or next request, sorry, not next request, the next door. I call it next complaint, but we monitor those and we try to get a pulse of the city based on that. And they are oftentimes very much just people ranting about things, but if we can extract information from that, that's a non-traditional source that we have. I would say the other thing is, talking to our employees. They're by and large residents of the community. They have needs, they have ideas, and we want to know what their thoughts are as we move forward as well. So community engagement's super huge on this. Like most local governments, we don't want to make decisions in a vacuum. And really what it is, one of our challenges right now is local government has not stopped. We still have to fix the roads. We still have to maintain the medians. New Mexico legalized marijuana this year and gave us a very tight timeline to come up with our zoning restrictions. And so we had to push to get that done. So there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes that really impact us focusing on just ARPA and COVID recovery. But you know, we're still trying to engage our residents as best as we can. And I just think taking every opportunity to communicate with the community, going to our senior services, our senior center and talking with the seniors about their needs and their expectations. Our fire department gives us feedback all the time about what they're seeing in the community since they're out and about. Code enforcement is a great example. So we've also looked into some other creative ways to engage the community that might be beneficial to them. So we waived all of our alcohol permit fees this year for our private businesses, for example, which was something that did come from our Chamber of Commerce and our business community. So we're doing everything we can to listen to our community and our needs and then respond accordingly. And I'm sure everybody else is doing the same thing. There's a lot of new things to this. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I'm excited for coming up with these creative ways to engage with the community that we probably would be 10 years behind on if the pandemic hadn't happened. So, you know, lemonade out of lemons, I think there's just going to be tons of great things that come out of this disaster that we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, you come across as being an optimistic kind of guy, and I appreciate that because there are a lot of positives. The adaptation that local governments have made, and as AJ points out, just the adaptation that people have made in such a weird environment.
Well, and one of the big challenges on the non-optimistic side is the amount of national politics that have spilled into local elected officials. And who would have ever thought that a virus would be a political thing? And it is, and it affects how we do our funding and what people's opinions are. So we also have to navigate this weird political environment that we live in right now as well.
Another really critical reason why you've got to have that engagement to understand what current real priorities are. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Steve. James, can you talk about how community input influences how resident and business needs are met in Kyle?
Yeah, Matt, and I'm going to take a little bit of a different angle on this than the two previous speakers, because I want to focus really more on how the public input that we receive actually does affect the delivery of services. And I want to set the stage by saying, going back to something that AJ said, that silence is affirmation, right? So generally speaking, I think all of us that are in public service have this challenge where we're constantly trying to figure out ways to solicit input from our community, and the elected officials are trying to solicit information from their constituents for various different reasons, obviously, and different motives. What I have found, generally speaking, is whenever everyone is generally happy, or at the very least neutral, they're not too terribly incentivized to reach out and to express their opinions. AJ and Steve will know this. Very seldomly do citizens show up to city council meetings to tell you that you're doing a great job. Usually they show up to complain about things. So, and I hate to say it this way, but generally that means that is the litmus test. If you're not hearing a lot of complaints, then that generally means that people are either neutral or happy, in one of those two camps. Because if they were upset, you would be hearing about it. Now, as far as how citizen input engages us or works its way into our policies and procedures now, I would say I have to talk a little bit about a continuum where I believe that there's effectively a continuum to where on one side, there's the hands-off pure democracy. We don't want to, the elected officials don't want to take any chances of doing anything without getting the citizens' input on every single thing. And then on the other end of that spectrum is more the republic type thing on the continuum, where in the republic lens, it's I'm elected to make representation and to make tough decisions, and I'm going to make all the decisions. And that's kind of the continuum or the spectrum, I suppose. And I've seen that pendulum swing both directions, even in the time that I've been in Kyle. Kyle having grown so fast means that we're unlike Des Moines. We are very unstable politically. We have lots of turnover. Our average age, but despite my appearance, the average age in our community is 28. That's the average age of our community. So, and I think it's crept up to around 30, but it was 28 when I came here 15 years ago. So that tells you predominantly our demographic is young families that are moving into the community, and what have you. And that means that they are engaged in other things. They're probably both working, if assuming that it's a traditional family or traditional household, not barring any political comments on my part. I'm just saying, two working parents and some children. The children are growing and they're in school, and the parents are doing school stuff with them. And then both parents are working. They just don't really have a whole lot of time to get engaged. So we don't see a whole lot of engagement. We've had community committees, if you will, and our committee structure really got out of hand really fast, where we had like 18 or 22 different committees that were all operating, and several of the council members were then just using the committees to get the answers that they wanted. So those committees got cut back out. I think our citizens engage a lot with us through the tools that we have available, which is not the spoiler alert, but that I know that's your next question you're going to be asking is our tools. So I'm not going to go into that, but that's how a lot of them do engage. And I will say right now, our council's more on the republic, the republic, type mentality of I was elected to make decisions and I'm going to make the tough decisions. But we also aren't receiving a whole lot of feedback. And whenever we do, it's generally something that then does become a priority, because it just, going back to what I said, if you receive feedback, it's usually because something's not working right, and it requires, excuse me, it requires you to stop and take a look at it.
That's very helpful. I think that you laid out that in a very eloquent way, because I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, even I can remember my city management career, that evolution or that continuum of the importance that you place on making sure that you're in alignment with the city versus just simply getting the job done. And it is a dynamic that exists, I think, in communities across the way. It's really interesting to hear about how young your community is. And you're right, all of those challenges that relate to that age bracket. So that one thing I love about these panels is you always help people think. And that's a very thoughtful statement. So thanks. I really appreciate that, James.
Matt, if I may real quickly, I'd like to respond to something that Steve made mention of. And obviously New Mexico is his area. I'm in Iowa, and again with James in Texas. The one thing I can just refer to here in Iowa was, Steve alluded to it, it's the politicalization of the local elections, which are traditionally nonpartisan. And that really is going to play, I think, as you move forward in local government related issues. You're going to see that probably more. And I, just from a professional standpoint, and someone who's been in the profession for an awfully long time, I'm disappointed. Only because it makes at times what should be reasonably easy decisions to make, because they fit within the parameters of well-established guidelines and engineering and everything else, then they become politicized. And there's always that notion of when you have communities that are maybe sectioned off in wards, where someone in Ward 1 versus Ward 3 versus Ward 4, they want to do something for their constituents. But now, again, the last election we had throughout the metro, my counterparts throughout the metro said the same thing. They saw things on social media where candidates were identifying or putting labels on their opponents that were politically based. And I think that's going to be a real challenge to maintain, again, what I think is the most effective form of government is the local. This is where the rubber hits the road. And if you look at national surveys, you look at the national level, what is it, 11, 12%, people who think they're effective, and local governments in the 50, 60%, even higher. And so I hate to see that erode, because that I think there is those warning bells are starting to go off. And if I hear Steve talk about it in New Mexico, and I've experienced it in Iowa, and I'm sure James has in Texas. And so all 50 states are probably seeing that, and that's unfortunate.
And
Yeah.
AJ, I would say that it's actually a little worse in Texas because we're getting it not only at the local level, but we're also seeing the state back off of local control, and the state legislature is effectively pulling control away from local control back to state level control, and which is counterintuitive because it's run by Republicans right now. It should be the opposite way, but that's what we're seeing. So not only are we seeing the politicalization locally, we're also seeing the eroding of local control by the state.
Yep, same here.
Yeah. Well, that's a great lead in then to the following question. And Steve, let's start with you. Steve, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful for building engagement and for tracking your performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll preface it just to finish off the last statement that AJ made. In Aurora over the summer, they have gotten so politicized on their council that it's almost an even split of progressives and conservatives. They had a vacant council seat, and because of politics, they actually never filled it. They're in violation of their charter right now. And they went through three rounds of voting at 3 different council meetings. The third was 100 rounds of voting for filling that one vacant council seat, and they weren't able to get it because of political dissension. So if we can't even agree on who to fill a vacant council seat, it's scary to me to think what other issues are going to be so much more of a challenge for us to deal with as administrators. But as far as the tools that we're using, I've mentioned the citizen survey. That was just really key for us right now. But one of the things that we noticed was our response rate was significantly lower than past years. And again, I think that ties back to just what's going on in the world and what people are willing to be bothered with right now. And maybe a lack of understanding of how useful that information is in us planning their community. But other tools that we use, obviously, social media. We've talked a lot about these things, citizen engagement. But I also want to echo some of the things James said. Unfortunately, a lot of our tools are just relying on staff expertise and less citizen focused in terms of asking them everything we're going to do. We just unfortunately don't have the participation right now, nor the time and the resources to do that all the time. So we do have to use a lot of internal ingenuity. One of the best tools that we use is not operating in a vacuum and collaborating with other communities, not only in our state, but around the country. I personally have a lot of friends in different communities around the country, so do a lot of my counterparts. And I've really asked all of our directors to step up with their professional organizations and give me feedback as to what the conversations are from their perspective as well, so we can embrace those ideas. And I think this is a very much we're all in it together type of thing. So even if we don't get direct feedback from our residents, there's still multiple opportunities to look at best practices and other things that are going on. And that's why I think panels like this are really crucial right now. So I won't elaborate more on some of the tools we're using. I've talked about them a lot. But we're, again, looking for those creative ways that we can hear the voice of our residents. A good example is we are getting back to some semblance of community events. We were able to actually build, using some higher education sales tax that we created, an outdoor concert venue that ties in with a university campus that we're trying to make happen here in the city. The New Mexico Philharmonic actually has fallen in love with the facility. They did our ground breaking and our ribbon cutting on July 4th and premiered the concert. And then they asked, can we come back and do a free concert for you all? And that was a tremendous opportunity. I went and I was able to talk to several residents about what are you liking right now? What's going on in the community? And then my last point on tools and what we're using, I think, is just a spirit of adaptability. There's a lot of unknowns right now. What is the end date for COVID? No one knows. What is the future of local government service delivery? We have some ideas, and there's a lot of good ideas, but I think there's a lot of things that need to be fleshed out. So collaboration, adaptability, communication, not operating in a vacuum, those are the key things that I'm looking for right now as we lead Rio Rancho into the next phase.
Thank you for that. That was great. I think sometimes communities, thanks for bringing up the public art aspect with the with your new venue, because I think sometimes people take for granted the value that public art presents to a community for opening opportunities for engagement. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Are you tracking your performance? Do any metric system or or methods for just kind of monitoring how you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use the citizen survey. We do it every 2 years. That's a huge thing for us. We are very active in our strategic plan as well. We're on the 5th year of a 5-year strategic plan, and we will be using that or we'll be updating that next year. A lot of the things that we're using are incidental tools. So we'll be updating our comp plan as well. And we want to tie in a lot of the feedback we get on the comp plan into our COVID efforts as well. I feel like just the routine things we do, the major things that we do that have a community engagement portal, we're using that data, and we do track our performance on our strategic plan. We track our benchmarking on the citizen survey every 2 years to see where we're increasing, where we're decreasing. And then we actively, work very hard to either make things, we'll always make things better, but certain areas we need to spend more attention on. So we definitely have some robust tools. We have a citizen report tool that's a mobile app that allows for people to put in work orders for public works issues, code enforcement issues. A lot of cities have those now. I think those are tremendous tools to have residents be able to self-report and us benchmark how our response times are, that type of thing. So we're really looking into that. And then we're also monitoring very closely the effectiveness of working remotely. And we have a very robust telework policy, but we're monitoring that daily to see what's working, what's not working, what level of authority can we give our staff to not be as in the office all the time, and give some flexibility for them to work at home. So these are all things that are very valuable to us in our processes.
That's great. Sounds like you just got a lot of just great stuff going on. Thanks so much for
Sure.
sharing that.
Sure.
James, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful, and Kyle, for helping you to get resident input and for tracking your performance?
Yeah, Matt, I sure can. And I'm afraid this may turn into a this section of podcast brought to you by the following the following businesses. But I guess let me start with the people aspect of what we're doing. I mentioned earlier in this talk that about 3 or 4 years ago we started to transition to what I'm considering like the new organization, if you will. And a part of that plan was to create a communications department. And we did that by hiring effectively a newspaper person locally to get it started, but to kind of start handling the social medias and the websites and the things that most all cities have these days. But we also took in the cable channel. So now we have the local broadcast cable channel. And our staff, we have grown to include graphic designers, videographers, and special event coordinators and those types of things, all within the communications department. So we have, if you will, without talking about softwares or tools or things like that, we started with people who specialize on communicating. And what then happened was real engagement on our social media, real engagement on our websites, and dynamic information being able to be changed and updated, tracking, targeted ads. We pay for targeted ads for various different types of events, and also for specific items that we need to make sure that citizens see. We also every city does direct mailing, probably with utility billing or something like that, but you can't talk about this without talking about direct mailing. So we do direct mailing. And then once we started in the world of COVID, what COVID allowed for us to do was roll out some of the technology that we'd had in place, but wasn't what we would consider at the time socially acceptable. Case in point, the Zoom that we're using right now to communicate and talk virtually, and to be able to expand who we talk to and how and when and why. Rolling out, we have Zoom glass rooms, which are effectively like a conference room that's set for Zoom at any point in time. You just go and click a button and you create a Zoom meeting, and it's already got the camera and it's already got the TVs, and the invite stuff is all there. And then we can easily have those communications, which allows us to invite people into meetings that may otherwise not have been able to attend. That same technology has been used in conjunction with our broadcasting for council meetings, meaning that, and Steve, I think, was talking about how, we virtual meeting type space, and then people still aren't participating. And AJ said something like, if it's the meetings in your backyard, you still won't come. Yeah, look, there's still some truth to that, but at the end of the day, 2 years ago, it was completely unheard of to have a council member or a staff member or a citizen dial into a meeting and attend via phone. That certainly wasn't happening. And then to consider that you could do that, but with video and audio at the same time, is just completely changed the acceptance of that in the public eye, which has made it to where we can actually use the technologies that we already kind of had for some time. Beyond that, we're also have a people presence at our events, kind of like Steve was alluding to. We have maintained our market days, which is just an outside pop-up tent. Bring your wares or your foods or your whatevers and sell every other Saturday. And we have a city presence at those. We always have a booth with city staff. We also sell like city swag, but it gives opportunity for people to come up and engage that way and for us to solicit feedback. Of course, we do the citizen survey. Ours is annually instead of every 2 years. I mean, generally, I think that those things are okay. I'm always worried about how statistically relevant they actually are. But that aside, it's a very important feedback tool that many cities have. And then lastly, we've invited our Chamber of Commerce executive director to sit in on our weekly department head meetings. So we have our executive director of the Chamber of Commerce sitting in our weekly meetings, which gives us kind of an open dialogue to the representatives of the business community. That is probably enough of the stuff that we've done as far as tracking performance. So this is where I'm going to start dropping names, and maybe you can reach out and get some endorsements, and they can pay for some ad space for you, Matt. All right, so let's start with we were rolling out, and I'm not endorsing any of these specifically, but these are what we're using, so I'm just going to tell you. We were rolling out Tyler Technologies, their enterprise product, about 3 years ago is when we started it. It started with our CAD RMS through PD. And acronyms, that's basically the software that the dispatchers use to be able to dispatch police calls and to be able to track where our assets are. And then it moved into our building department, permitting, planning departments. Finance was our last section that we rolled out. We're looking at adding in the work order stuff for Public Works right now. And through all of that, Tyler has Socrata. I'm not really sure how they say it. I tend to say it Socrata, but I'm not sure that that's right, which is a dashboard that allows you to be able to quickly see your metrics and your statistics. How long is it taking you to do X, whatever X may be? How many of X's are you doing? And being able to see that in a dashboard format really quickly. So for example, building permits is an easy one to think about. How long is it taking to do pool permits? Is that, if it's supposed to be this amount of time and it's actually that amount of time, you can see it in a graphical format that's really easy to see. We're rolling that out right now, testing it internally, but rolling it out to where it'll be dashboards that'll be available to be seen. And some of that will be public facing for sure. We had C-Click Fix, which may be what Steve is using. I don't know as far as their public work order processing information, but we looking at readopting C-Click Fix after the work order system is up and running properly, because the last thing that we needed was more people generating work orders when there's no back system to support those work orders being generated. So that's another aspect. Then we're looking at Zen City. Zen City's a data harvesting platform. They're based out of Israel, but what I've seen the most value from them is being able to monitor all of the social medias, all of the HOA websites, all of the HOA bulletin boards, and be able to pull to you in real time the things that are trending, the topics that are trending, potholes or safety issues or what have you. That's probably a broad spectrum. We're using Zoom and Ring Central as our VoIP for being able to provide access to our staff. And then inside of Ring Central is a Zoom-like function, which allows us to have our meetings remotely. And we're using a combination of those tools, the Zoom and the Ring Central, for our city council meetings. And I think that's it. I'm sure there's probably some stuff I'm not thinking about, but gosh, my mouth is tired of talking. So
that's a pretty robust program for sure, James. Thanks for sharing it. I really appreciate the value of having your chamber executive director in your department head meetings. I think that is something that most communities do not do. So I'm glad you brought that up for people to consider that very important connection. So thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. AJ, can you talk about the strategies and tools that you're finding successful for engaging with your residents and for tracking your performance?
Again, I don't want to sound repetitive to the other gentlemen about what they've done. It's very, very similar to that. I'm not as up to date on some of the terminology, but we have again some of the same software type of systems. I think through Tyler we use that. The Zen City one is interesting because literally before this call, I got a phone call from a sales rep from Zen City because they're going to be at the Iowa League of Cities conference next week, and they wanted to make arrangements to meet with me. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I'm going to attend. It's over in another community in eastern Iowa, and it's only an hour and a half drive, so I may pop over and pop back. But it's interesting that these companies, they are so quick to respond to things that maybe that has been developed in the private sector. When you have your business is dependent upon being able to provide the right product or the right mix of products and on-time delivery and all those things that has been so critical in the private sector, you're seeing that now shift over to the public sector. And so for us, again, we've used almost all the tools that have been mentioned here. So again, I'm not going to repeat those, but it still is, the opportunities I think are almost endless. Again, 2 years ago, could we have done this meeting? During the pandemic, we closed City Hall and we were closed for 482 days. And during that time, we did all of our board and commission meetings. We did all of our city council meetings. We did all of our staff meetings virtually, and we conducted business. And so that will still be a venue for us. And so how we can push that out is a challenge to our community, because I think we saw people were engaged then. Again, there's that process of, I'm interested in what they're saying, but I don't want to drive down there. Now I could log on, and our meetings on average take about 40 minutes. And that's not a big commitment of time. And it's something you could have on the background when you cook dinner or you did something else. And it got them at least engaged. So, Matt, I don't think I have anything more really substantive to share versus what's already been shared.
Yep. No, I appreciate that, AJ. But I do know that based on what you have shared, you're doing a lot of great engagement and have been doing it for a long time. So I appreciate that.
And if I could real quick, I just want to make a comment on something that both James and AJ alluded to. I wrote a policy memo probably 2 months before COVID hit in Aurora about the cost and the feasibility of putting our policy committee meetings and our city council meetings in a virtual format. And it had a ridiculous price tag. I worked with our communications staff, and it was us, thinking old school government. But I think one of the things that's been a kick in the butt for me has been just maybe we can be a little bit more creative and flexible than we thought based on our training and our involvement in local government. Maybe things can happen a lot quicker than we would have ever expected. And I'd like to see a trend that continues. The private sector, I think, has been there for a long time. And I think this is an opportunity for us to catch up.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This has been a great conversation. I totally failed at keeping us within an hour, so I apologize for that. This would be the time, though, if any of you have any kind of final thoughts or have questions for each other. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Let me do that then. This has been great. This panel has not been disappointing to me at all. It's you have really provided the opportunity to think creatively, to think deeply, to think meaningfully on things that you're doing that others can take advantage of for just preparing for ARPA and for doing meaningful engagement with the community. You all recognize, and you're all doing such great work around engagement and building strong programs. It's just been really helpful to hear all of your perspectives and the systems that you have in place. I really appreciate you recognizing kind of the changing nature of local government and the politicization of some of the things that we do. And at the end of the day, you're building a community and helping people's lives get better. So been a really, really cool conversation. So thanks for everything that you shared. I'll wrap this up. I will send you a follow-up email with all of the contact information for each other so that you can have that connection. If you think of anybody that might have some interest in participating in one of these panels, I do these every week. And I'm always looking for local leaders that would enjoy or have a good impact on what we're trying to accomplish in sharing ideas. You'll start seeing your video highlight segments on LinkedIn probably next week sometime. And thanks for sharing them with your LinkedIn networks. That's the people that respect your opinions will benefit from this conversation today. I'll probably be reaching out to you within the next several days next week, just to touch base. I'd love to get your feedback on how you think this went. Your first piece of input will say, well, I thought you said it was going to be within an hour. So that's very good.
I've sat on enough panels to where I know better. When you have 3 people talking, you're not going to get it done in an hour.
Well,
Especially 3 city managers.
Yes.
Once we start, we can't stop.
the conversation was so great, though. I didn't really want to stop it at all. So everything that all of you shared today, I thought was just super. But I appreciate you spending the extra time. I'll look forward. Think about how this program and this process can be improved, so that others can benefit from the information that's being shared. That's the main thing I'm looking for. So with that, I get the pleasure of meeting and getting reacquainted with leaders in the profession. That's a great thing for me. Just look forward to hopefully seeing a couple of you, maybe all of you in Portland.